Welcome back to the second talk this morning from Coastwise North Devon. This talk's by Paula Ferris. I'm sure Paula needs no introduction as one of the founders and the driving force behind Coastwise for all these years. Paula's going to talk to us about nudibranchs with some amazing video and photos of these weird and beautiful creatures. So over to you, Paula.
This is the sea slug story, but it's more a story of my learning about rock pooling and learning about rock pooling animals. I'm a generalist, so I came to this to rock pooling about 15 years ago. And within about a year and a half, I got myself a super camera. And the first time I took this Super Olympus camera out, I happened to take the photograph that's before you now. Probably the best photograph I've since taken of nudibranch, but it excited me no end. And it got me interested in these animals. I kind of expected them to look like the ones we see on television in southern seas, and possibly when our divers go into some of our places like Lundy and down on the south coast, you occasionally see lovely nudibranchs. And I was expecting them to be like that. They aren't really like that. They're much, much smaller. And these are tiny. You see how tiny they are because that is a little dog whelk shell, or what, a couple of centimeters. And the nudibranchs are probably less than a centimeter. If they stretch out, they might make it to 2 centimeters, but then they don't often stretch out when you look for them on the shore. So they're kind of tiny and elusive, but when you find them, they're very colorful. So they became a challenge, not only for me, but I think for most Coastwise members when we go rock pooling. It's exciting when you find a nudibranch, if you find a nudibranch. Jan Whittington usually manages it. But even the search is interesting because it takes you through lots of other animals. So I've called it a sea slug story and a seashore wonder. I think they're wonderful. I'm hoping you will by the time I've finished. These are sea slugs too, but they're not what we're going to be focusing on. I put them here just so that we kind of get them out of the way, but they are rather lovely. These are, we call sea slugs is the word we use for all the animals that are kind of soft-bodied marine mollusks. They're like our garden slugs, but they're marine garden slugs. It reminds us that they're mollusks. Mollusks usually have shells. These are two of the species that have kind of residual shells tucked in under their fleshy parts and here. But nudibranchs don't really have shells like that. We'll see what they have in a minute. So this is a sea hare. This is a solar-powered sea slug. Both exciting and interesting animals to find. This is the one we most often find. It's one of the larger ones. It's about finger size. And I'll try and use fingers as an indication of the size of my nudibranchs. So in their case, it's more likely to be fingernails because they're usually smaller than your fingernail. So this sea hare, solar-powered sea slug's got chlorophylls in it, which photosynthesize, make it a really interesting animal. But our nudibranchs are even more interesting, I think, because they're far more varied. Their habitats are more varied, their lifestyles are more interesting, but they're probably more elusive. So I hope you'll bear with me. I hope you'll be a little bit enchanted by this, because if you're not, then you're probably not going to find them wonderful. But this is one of my favorite nudibranchs because it's nice and clear and performs well under my camera, which is perched on the end of a microscope, which is giving this image times 40 magnification. So the actual sea slug, it's probably the size of the half moon on your little fingernail. I'm pretty certain it's Ancola gibbosa, but we're not going to worry too much about the identification. We're just going to look at the animals and see a little bit about how they work and whether we might be able to find some more on the shore and a little bit more about them. If you see here, this is the lovely Wikipedia definition of them. Marine gastropod mollusks which shed their shell after the larval stage. So up until I read that, I didn't know that that was their definition or a definition of them. I didn't know about the shell after the larval stage. And then I set out to try and photograph it. And if we have time, we'll see that I just about succeeded. This is just a slide of lots of the nudibranchs I've spotted on wanderings around. This is just a sample of them. And the reason I put them here is partly just to give you a sense of size and how you see them on the shore. Sometimes when you can't actually see them on the shore, but they are there. So we'll start with this one, because this was one that we Coastwise found in Lundy on one of our trips about 10 years ago. And it's actually on a piece of seaweed on the shore as it actually appeared. I probably had to turn the seaweed over to find it because they like to be tucked away in the dark. But it's there and it's rather lovely, and it's probably been feeding on these little clumps, which are bryozoans. Most of these seaweeds feed on other animals. They're all carnivores, quite fierce carnivores for their size. And those things that they feed on are all sessile. They're all on the rocks or on weed. They're on something. So that's what we have to kind of look for them in those situations. This one was just freely floating in the sea. I didn't find it when it landed. I don't know where it landed, but you don't often see them like that. But when you do, they're quite balletic in their movements. They're rather lovely. These were obviously photographed on the shore, but what I've done is I've taken a little 6 centimeter Petri dish, filled it with water, plucked the sea slug off from where it's been resting, usually undistinguishable from almost anything else where it's been resting, put it in the Petri dish, and it opens up and reveals its delicate tracery of sticky out bits, I want to call them. That's the most technical term, I think. But that's what you're looking for to help you ID it and understand it. This one has also been on a Petri dish. This one too has been on a Petri dish, much magnified. Because it is the most glorious colours, I've chosen to include it, even though it wasn't a very good photograph, but much magnified. This one too, much magnified. But look, there's a little face there. You must think it's a face. Those are its eyes. This is just a lump. I expect it has a technical name.
It looks like a nose.
Yes, it's not a nose, but
you always return them afterwards.
And Rob is asking me to tell you that I always return them. I try and return them the day after. I mean, if I can take them on shore, I won't take them home at all. And we'll see why. There's a very good reason for not bringing them home. And this one, I've left this imaging on from the microscope just to show that it really did need high magnification to capture this one, but it's extraordinary shape. It's almost got castellations, little turrets all around it. And it's got really chunky rhinophores, chunky sticky out bits there, and gills. Right, so that gives you just a glimpse of the different shapes and sizes and colours of them. This is lovely, this is lacy, it's one of my favourites. Right, so they can be divided into the nudibranchs that we see on the shore. Nudibranch means naked gills, and they can be divided into those that show their naked gills very strongly, provided they're out of water. Underwater, they retract and they just look like a big blob, but underwater, they show them strongly and they're very beautiful. They're very fine, lacy, pinnate gills. And then they've got these rhinophores, which are sense organs. They can kind of sniff and taste their way around. They've got other organs, which this one's got some kind of other tentacles here. And we and scientists don't really know entirely how those sense organs work and what kind of senses they are, touch, smell, whatever. We know they're not vision, and we think they're not hearing, but we still don't know enough about how they're working. So, but they're divided into two forms. This form that has the naked gills, nudibranch, naked gills, clearly visible underwater. And I've put where I'm confident of the names, I've put it. These are rather intriguing. I don't know if you look at them closely, you might see something slightly odd about this picture, and it is that there are two there, and they're actually mating. So I intrude into the private lives of nudibranchs quite fearlessly. This one I've included because this is as I found it on the strand line. And it's nice to know that sometimes you can find nudibranchs on the strand line, because that's a really accessible place for most people. It was underwater on the strand line on this seaweed, which it has actually been clearing of its hydroids. That's these sticky, these little white lacy bits. This nudibranch has gone chomping through, eating them as it went. I've taken a photograph of its gills there just because they were particularly lovely. This is I didn't see this until I looked at the photograph afterwards, and I'm fairly certain it's a sac of nudibranch eggs of another species. And I found yet another species elsewhere on the same strand line on the same day. So that was unusual to find more than one species at a time. So this is the other shape. This is the shape that tends to throw up the most gloriously coloured nudibranchs. And it's got these lots and lots of sticky out bits, the serratae. They're very special, and we'll see why later. And they lead to some of the more unusual and intriguing behaviours of nudibranchs. These are its full set of sense organs. The previous shape has these sense organs, but they're concealed by the mantle. So that's really rather lovely, and these are the ones we get very excited about finding, because they've got all these serrata. This one's got the serrata too, but they fall around. There's a central parting down here which we can't see because the serrata closed over it. But it's how these are clumped, how they fall, and what these little tentacles are like. That is the ID. Are the ID characteristics of the nudibranchs. But I have to admit that after all my enthusiasm, I still am not very good at identifying them. Those are pretty okay, and this is called a common grey sea slug, though it is often brown. Forgive it for that. Right, now I've said they're wonderful. You may be beginning to wonder. But when I tell you these things, you might wonder even more, but I think these things are all key clues to how amazing it is. It doesn't live long. Most of them don't live more than a year. We see them usually in their adult form. This is the adult form of a nudibranch, fairly well developed. We see it early summer, and within a couple of months, it will have found its mate or mates, and they will have laid their eggs, and the eggs will have started, will probably hatch as larvae, and then these disappear, probably to die. But there's not much known about that. Meanwhile, the eggs and the larvae will then develop and settle out, and presumably spend the next sort of 6 to 9 months somewhere. And I'm not quite sure where. Nobody seems to know where. Every species is different. So there's a huge amount to know about them. The so what, why bother? We'll try and answer that at the end. They have an unpromising start. A little egg sac may contain hundreds to thousands, even millions for some species, of eggs, and very few will survive. The eggs will hatch out into larvae, which become food in the plankton for everything. Those that do survive become blobs, which we'll see in a minute. They settle out somewhere and they stay roughly in the same place, we think. We're not sure where they go, as I said, for well over half their lifespan. So, but presumably it's in the same place. They're very picky eaters. Many can only eat one species of prey item. They have extraordinary topsy-turvy insides, which are quite fascinating for reasons I hopefully we'll see. And then they have family values or they don't. I don't know much about that, and we'll see whether any of you can add to that, or add to any of my understanding of this, but and whether you think they're wonders. I think that's magnificent for an animal that is about a centimetre, quite extraordinarily detailed. Right, so the short life, unpromising start. This is, I think, about the earliest whole blob I managed to film down the microscope. It is probably, but I'm guessing, a couple of weeks old. But it's quite quickly, it's a settled out larvae that has just started to develop its adult form. What we normally see on the shore are blobs like this. That one's pretty striking. You might spot that, especially if you know to look for it. This one is my favorite, a recurring theme throughout this talk will be my favorite. This is a poly quadrilineata, Polycera quadrilineata, too much of a mouthful, so I'll call it poly from now on. And this one I only found because I turned over the rock and looked at it with a ×10 microscope just to see if there was a nudibranch there. So they become, when they are adults, they become this gorgeous thing. But it's tiny. Look, this is a small mussel shell, and there it is. It's changed its name 3 times since I started my interest in these things 10 years ago, so I give up on their names, really. This one is a Secacera, and we find about 1 or 2 a year of these. Quite striking animals, quite intriguing to watch. And this is the Polycera quad that I mentioned earlier, which actually is usually yellow and white, but sometimes isn't, which is most confusing. Most of the other nudibranchs are fairly constant to their colour, so that, which is good. It's not much in the marine is. And this is one of my absolute favourites. And but partly it's this face thing again, isn't it? He's not going anywhere very much. He's not liking it where he is. He's viewed down a microscope on a tiny bit of algae that I've got. I didn't expect him to be there. And there he was. And he's using his rhinophores, those yellow tip sticky out bits, to try and sense food. And he's out of luck because there isn't enough food. I didn't know he was there, and I hadn't made sure to bring enough bryozoan on my samples for him, if that was what he fed on. And so he went back promptly. And it took him about 2 minutes to progress to the end of this piece of seaweed, and you've got 20 seconds. So they don't go very far, but they do have to crawl over the substrate. These have gone a bit further. This is tiny. This is about, again, about ½ centimetre. I galloped along this slide. I had trouble. It was going so fast on this slide on its sticky, mucus-laden foot that I had trouble photographing it.
That's a very good photograph.
Thank you, Robert. My husband is a much better photographer than I am, but all these are mine. I don't think any of them are his. And this is one swimming. They do swim. This is a Polycera again, a poly again. And I dislodged it off some seaweed, and so it flexed away, swam away from me. But my videoing underwater is not good enough, unfortunately, to capture it. It's worth seeing. Interesting how they show their guts. That's one of the things that intrigues me about them. You can see how they work, which has always intrigued me about these animals. This one is not a very exciting seaweed, sea slug, but I picked it off a rock to put it in the Petri dish to photograph it, and it span round like a dog chasing its tail, which I'd never seen before. And then it stretched out and mooched around like they normally do, going nowhere. And I just wonder, because as we'll see later on, at the end of these serrata, these sticky out bits, it's got little poisonous tips, whether it was actually trying to protect itself from the nasty thing that had come along and fished it out of a rock. So, right. So they don't go very far because they are very picky eaters. And so they just go to where their food is. This one is a brave little sea slug because this is its food. Huge great beadlet anemone, and this is the common grey sea slug, again another brown one, and it's going to try, and when the tide goes out and the anemone closes up, well, I'm not sure actually when it will eat it, and how it will eat it, but it's definitely there. And this was on the Crow Point, where it's such a harsh environment. I'm lucky to find any nudibranchs and very few anemones, so it's waiting for its moment, I think. Here we have one eating the same kind of prey. So the anemone belongs to the Cnidaria, the same, and operates on the same system as this other member of the Cnidaria, which is this is a hydranthe. What's it, Rob? I'm losing my words. I'm getting very old. A hydroid, and this one is feeding along this hydroid, and as you can see here, the hydroid has lost its lovely little bits of hydranthes because they have been eaten here by this nudibranch. Here we have a nudibranch coming up to eat some more of these, which are bryozoans. So we've got Cnidaria, bryozoan. Here we've got a sea lemon, which is a common and quite large sea slug. It's one of the earliest we find. It's usually on our shores from about April, May. I found lots at Saunton this year. Its rosette of gills is hidden because it's out of water. It feeds on sponge, so another food source, particular sponge. And this is a really rather mean nudibranch, which I photographed in South Cornwall and hope to find in North Devon, so we must look for them. It feeds on the eggs of this sea lemon, and it's a Favorina. And this is my most recent new find. This is about 2 weeks ago at Saunton again. It doesn't look like much, and I put it in because it's got such a lovely name, Dusky Doris, according to Dave Fenwick on his A Photo Marine website, which is a wonderful website, really worth looking at, A Photo Marine. And part of the reason I was interested in it was difficult to find. Amazing that I found it at all, really, because I wasn't really looking, not expecting to find one because it was on a rock that didn't have any likely food source. But it turns out that they eat barnacles, and how a little thing like this is a razor shell. So again, it's probably a matter of 1.5 centimeters maximum. How that can pack enough punch to cut into a barnacle, I don't know.
Maybe it just eats the tentacles of the barnacle.
I think it actually is supposed to be able to break open a barnacle.
Is it really? My goodness.
I mean, what you say makes perfect sense, but I think it actually. And here I've come across the most rare and extraordinary way a nudibranch feeds. This is the University of Illinois slide. It tells me about 5 things, this slide, but the most interesting one is that they've had to resort to a fake nudibranch. I think it's made of pot or fiberglass or something to demonstrate it. But that's partly because they use fake nudibranchs and they use robotic nudibranchs for their research, because I think it must be because it's almost impossible to keep these nudibranchs for any length of time in captivity, because they have such specialized food sources. And it would be very difficult to sustain a large enough colony of, probably not financially viable to a large enough colony of their food source. It's much easier to try and create a robot and follow the things they want to know about them that way. And we'll see a bit more about that right at the end. Anyhow, this nudibranch feeds on a hydroid like this, because the hydroid feeds on a member of the zooplankton, which is a tiny, tiny kind of shrimp-like animal, which can be, the size of which can be measured in hair widths. And the nudibranch isn't interested in the food the food of the hydroid, it's interested in the food within the hydroid that came from this. And it's called a kleptopredator. So that's a new one on me, amazing. So they are very specific in their food. So they're topsy-turvy animals, and they feed in a rather peculiar way. They are mollusks, so they have radula, which means they have a kind of ribbon of very sharp teeth. This is an electro. This is very high magnified slide of the, I can't think of the word at the moment, of what they've got in their mouth. Their mouth parts are soft as butter almost, and so they manage somehow to grasp the prey with difficulty and take it into there, and then they get to work on it with these teeth, and then the food goes into their gut, which extends into these sticky out bits in the half of the nudibranchs that follow this model. And somehow, although when they're feeding on anemones and hydroids that have defensive darts, poison darts, they manage to take those defensive poison darts into their gut and somehow process them to the end of the serrati without firing them, because if they fire them, they've gone. They're no longer useful for defense and may actually do them some harm. No, I don't think it would do them any harm, because in theory they do fire them occasionally. It presumably doesn't kill them, or they will be defeating. Anyhow, they take them to the end of there, and they rest and collect there in these nido sacs and act as deterrents to the predators, which is really, really clever. And it's believed by most people that the bright colours of a lot of these nudibranchs are warning signals to potential predators. Don't touch me because I've got some firepower in here. So the other strange thing about their physiology is that their anus is here, somewhere on their back. It's usually here. And these cerati also act as gills. So they breathe in the oxygen from the seawater through which they have just expelled their waste material. So they are a bit topsy-turvy.
Are the toxic substance concentrated in the serrata?
At the end, in the nido sacs at the end of the serrata, not all of the serrata, though I understand that the serrata can be regenerated if anything is bold enough to try and bite them anyhow. But now I'm just going to show you, I won't go into that because it's too detailed, I think, but this is a tip of a nudibranch that's just changed its name, and it's now called Antiopella cristata. It used to be Journolus cristata, and this is one that has these kind of little firepower serrata all around its body to protect it. So
yes,
rather lovely.
Fantastic.
Now, this is an moment, please, if you're still with me. I don't know how many will have ever seen a heart pump in action.
Oh.
But this, thank you, this is one.
Is that a juvenile?
No, this is a tergipes, which is always tiny and nearly always transparent.
God, fantastic. And
you can see the whole of its operation here. So it's taking its food in and it's passing it down, and there's an open circulatory system. So this pump is pumping water with oxygen in it around its body all the time. And you would think the heart is very vulnerable, but as I said, it's got these protective sticky out bits, serrati, all around it. So presumably they do protect it. The other thing that's intriguing about this slide is that it's got these eggs, and I'm referring to it as it because they are hermaphrodites. So I'm not sure what the current terminology should be, but I'm going to call it it. It's a male and a female. All in one. So now tergipes are super because they are transparent and they are tiny, and this was magnified down. This would be times 40 down my microscope. This is, you can see this, oh, I love these things. These are the polys again, and you can see the heart at work here, pumping away very fast, and but they're glorious little animals, and I think very charming. Anyhow, there we go. So family values. These two are together, and they may be together because they're thinking of getting it seriously together to mate. Who knows? Quite often, I think usually when you find nudibranchs in close proximity, that's what they're about. Here, I took this photograph without even realizing that there was a cushion star in the picture. And this is a nudibranch that's near the eggs it's recently laid. The egg mass is characteristic of that particular species. Most of them are characteristic of their species, but some of the characteristics are so minimally different from one another that it's not always definitive. And here we have two nudibranchs actually mating. These are sea hare, and this is what nudibranchs usually do. They usually lay clumps of eggs all around them, millions and millions altogether of some species.
Sorry, that's a sea lemon, isn't it?
Sea lemon. What
sea
do
lemon.
I call it? A sea hare?
Yeah.
I often call it a sea hare, so sorry. These are sea lemons.
Yeah.
That is, thank you. Good job you're here, Rob. This is the gills,
yeah.
But the tide's just gone out. So it's just retracting it. You can still see it's there. And this is a sponge that they've been eating and that will be there, presumably for their young. When their young hatch as larvae, Larvae usually means dispersal, but they probably won't disperse very far because they have been deliberately laid near food supplies. And quite often you find that these sea slugs stick around for quite a long time after they've laid their eggs. And I don't know whether it's because it's often just a single one, whether they're planning on, if the eggs get destroyed, getting together and laying some more or not, I don't know. It's one of the reasons I say family values question mark.
Do you think they're protecting the eggs?
Well, not really sure how they
Predators?
might, but I'm not quite sure how they could. They're not. Well, we'll see. This is an unusual bit that I found of eggs in Crow Point. I hope I'm all right for time. Am I all right for time? Yeah. And I got really excited when I saw this. I didn't expect to see a new nudibranch on Crow because it's so really rough. But eventually I found them, and it's the ones I showed you earlier. Under a huge mound of this seaweed, I uncovered these. And this is obviously what they've been feeding on, which is a really Arcionidium. It's a bryozoan. I'm not sure which. Robin might know. And they are mating. They're supposed to mate right sides together. And you're never quite sure how, but I think they probably are. The head of this is up here, and so that's its right side, and this is the right side of the rear of that one. There we go. So, but they'd laid little ribbons like that all over the place, and it took me about a quarter of an hour to find the actual sea slugs. And this is very near the end now, because this is something I found about 3 days, a week ago, something like that. Last low tide at Saunton, I found a piece of seaweed had just been torn off the rocks. It was really rough. I probably shouldn't have been there. I opened it up because I saw a flash of white in the red seaweed, and this is what I found. Now, what do you think that is? Oh, right. It is a mass of pollies, and I suppose they're having a get together, and they're laying eggs. And this is I'm under an umbrella in the rain photographing this because I didn't want to, I couldn't possibly take it away.
That's really good.
And the focus changes a bit, and it goes from these onto here. There are actually 4 nudibranchs on the seaweed altogether, and they are actually laying eggs as they go. That was lovely. I was really thrilled to see that. See, if we go back one, just a minute. See, I think this one is laying those eggs. This one's sort of given up, I think, and is going off. But the others are in the throes of laying them. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And these are the eggs that they lay. This is another ooh-ah moment, because these are turgipes. Not only show you their innards, but they lay their eggs almost in clusters as you're watching. And quite often I see them, I'll repeat that one if I can. Yeah, I see them doing this. This is, the eggs are starting to release their larvae. And the larvae are trying to emerge. I suspect the number of eggs seems to decrease as I'm watching, over a day I'm watching. And I suspect that the larvae may well eat the other eggs, but I'm not sure. And this is an extraordinary to me, but probably means nothing to you, but this is the shell of the larvae, and this is the larvae, and it's actually difficult to see here, but it's actually got a cilia here, which is drawing in water, hopefully to get some food from the water, and it's got some other movement going on in here, and I'm not sure. It may be a pump, maybe it has a simple heart, I don't know. And if you try and find films of these kind of things on the net, it's actually quite difficult. In fact, I didn't succeed, but others will do better than me, no doubt. So we've gone from the beginning back to the beginning of the life cycle. Within a couple of weeks, that will settle out somewhere, find a little niche near, probably quite near food, probably attracted by some kind of pheromones. And within a couple of weeks, it will start to develop into an adult. And on its way, it will go through some rather aberrant forms when it's got 1 and a bit of these sticky out bits. And then within a few weeks, it'll be back to that. Will have developed into that, which I think is amazing. wonderful. And I hope you agree. Now, if you're in any doubt and you're thinking, so what? This is my so what moment. We don't seem to want to go there. This is a slide from the Illinois sea slug school. They seem to have devoted a very large branch of their marine research to sea slugs, and they're trying to develop various pharmaceutical products from some of the qualities of the sea slug, the toxins that some of them contain, and the methods they use to operate their very simple nervous system, and the way that they manage to get those poison darts from the nidaria up and to undischarged to the very tips. Things like that, lots of things that we don't understand how they do it. They're studying them. So, but in particular, these are the ones that sort of catch attention, and the potential for Alzheimer's disease cures, etc. I'm a bit skeptical about all these because I keep reading about them, but very few of them reach fruition. And I've put this one, this is the absolute last slide. This is where I came in with Coastwise in 2006. And Rob, this is my husband's photographs as produced in the journal. So they were excellent photographs. But they're in newsprint, which has been in my scrapbook for a while, so a bit faded. But one of the ones that kind of captured the eye was this, this lovely nudibranch here, which is the Edmondsella pedata, the one that's changed its names about 4 times, and is kind of it was charismatic when we started, and I think it helped Coastwise recruit 26 members to its first ever meeting. So thank you to it, thank you to the nudibranchs, and thank you for listening.
Well, thank you very much, Paula. That was absolutely fantastic, fascinating and amazing photograph.